A C-47 flies overhead at last. The plane landed on the runway, carrying food and supplies for hundreds and thousands of West Berliners. 30 minutes later, the plane and its pilots take off again. The single C-47 is one of thousands of planes that arrived in West Berlin in the time span of 15 months. From 1948 to 1949, carrying 2.4 million tons of food and supplies.
Before we start to talk about today's subject, I'm going to do a quick recap before the airlift started. So the war ended when America nuked Japan twice and a new war started, a bitter and cold one. Full of state propaganda, the fight between communism, capitalism, and if the world will end at the push of a button. That was known as the Cold War that happened in the late 40s to the early 90s. But let's segue back to our topic though. Germany was split into 4 puppet states, or zones, from its past self. The American, British, French, and the Soviet sectors were zones, or puppet states as you can say. Berlin was applied the same way, but on a much smaller scale. The Allies decided it was a good idea to make a West Germany as a buffer zone and an example of democracy to the east. So they combined the British, French, and American sectors together. We have 2 states, the East and the West. East Berlin is communist and West Berlin is democratic. Just to put this in a nutshell, and not being biased or anything, but the East is not as good as the living condition and standard as the West. The Soviets were concerned about the unified West Berlin and capitalist city smacked right in the middle of their occupation zone that would likely be a powerful and aggressive anti-Soviet.
The main event was the Allies conducted one of the biggest humanitarian aid ever by flying to West Berlin, land at Tempelhof Airport, and drop supplies such as food, water, and fuel every 3 minutes, 24/7, 12 months a year. The people that were involved were the Americans, the British, and the people in the British Commonwealth. The opposite side was the Soviets. This event happened in 1948 to 1949. This happened because of the Soviets blockade all routes into West Berlin. Thus, the Allies decided to conduct an airlift because if the Soviets try to or shoot down an American or British transport plane, which their anti-aircraft gun, that would mean a sign of war. The airlift is used to help the Berliners so they don't die. The Berlin airlift happened in West Berlin. The Soviets were affected since they thought trying to stop all supply lines will make the West hand over West Berlin. Instead, the Allies did the airlift, which caused the people of West Berlin to gain hope and not fall into Soviet hands.
The short-term impact that happened was that immediately Berliners obtained daily necessities and drifted into the western side, and the Soviets backed down and allowed the West to bring food into West Berlin after the airlift. The thing that did not change was that the West and the Eastern countries still have a bitter relationship with each other. The Soviets were impacted by this barrier because they thought the West were just going to hand over West Berlin when the blockade started. The reason why this broken barrier is important to history is because it showed that the West is willing to stand up to the East, which is a good thing. The area affected were West Berlin because West Berlin was the area that the East threatened to starve if the West doesn't hand it over.
This topic is important because it was the sole thing that improved public relations with the West Berliners and Germany later on, which gives hope and trust to them. The long-term significance of this is that it showed that the West is willing to stand up to the East and the domino that started the Cold War. The positive impact of this broken barrier was that it aided the civilians of West Berlin from less food shortages and obtained fuel to stay warm in the cold Berlin War. The negative impact was that it made the West and the East relation bitter, much more bitter. The work has been done. Nothing is left to be done since this took place over 71 years ago. But people are still being impacted by the single event from their parents and grandparents about the short time where Allied bombers came to West Berlin and delivered no bomb but food and fuel.
The Allies conducted one of the biggest humanitarian aid ever by flying to West Berlin, land at Tempelhof Airport, and drop supplies such as food, water, and fuel every 3 minutes, 24/7, 12 months a year. West Berliners obtained daily necessities, thus improved public relations with the West, and saved a lot of people from dying. This is why the Berlin Airlift is important to history and had broken a barrier.
The Soviet planners failed to recognize our strength in the air. They did not understand our determination to fulfill our obligations to the people under our charge. They did not reckon with the will of several million Germans in Berlin who want no part of the type and kind of government which is being imposed upon them.
The enemies of human freedom in this world can, in the end, only achieve their purpose by brute force. All history shows that they will not be held in check by weakness. Peace will never be bought by appeasement. The peace of the world will only be secure when the forces on the side of peace are stronger than the forces on the side of evil.
Poor little dreams that keep trying to come true. It's all over, but